I need the Anderson portfolio analysis on my desk by tomorrow morning, Trevor Phillips barked as he breezed past my cubicle, not bothering to wait for my response. His expensive cologne lingered in the air long after he disappeared into his corner office. I sighed, glancing at the clock on my computer. Already 6 p.m. in Houston, and another late night loomed ahead. This request would take hours, but that was life at North Peak Financial. As a senior risk analyst, my days were consumed with developing models to protect our clients' investments, and more importantly, to protect the firm's bottom line. My name is Ivy Carter, and I've spent the last 4 years at North Peak developing risk assessment models that have quietly become the backbone of our operation. I'd been promised a promotion to director if I could help navigate the firm through what everyone knew was coming, a market correction that threatened to destabilize our most profitable portfolios. I picked up my phone to cancel yet another dinner with my sister. "Hey, Vanessa, rain check for tonight? Trevor just dumped another project on me." "Again?" "Ivy, this is the 3rd time this month," she said, disappointment evident in her voice. "I know, but this could be the catalyst for my promotion. Once I'm director, things will calm down." "That's what you said last year," Vanessa replied. "Just don't let them take advantage of you." Her words hung in the air as I ended the call. The truth was, I loved what I did. Creating mathematical models that could predict market behavior gave me a thrill that few would understand. For months, I'd been perfecting a proprietary risk assessment formula that could identify exposure to market volatility with unprecedented accuracy. I called it the Adaptive Market Vulnerability Index, AMVI for short, and it was my masterpiece. As I settled in for another long night, I noticed Trevor watching me through his office window. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, but not before I caught a glimpse of something unsettling in his expression. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed him eyeing my work with unusual interest. 2 weeks earlier, during a meeting with the executive team, I'd presented preliminary results from my model, showing how it predicted several market anomalies that traditional models had missed. The room fell silent as I walked them through the mathematics. Even our normally reserved CEO, Jonathan Wells, leaned forward in his chair. "Impressive work, Ivy," he'd said. "If this performs as well as you believe, it could save us millions when the correction hits." Trevor had smiled tightly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "That's why I've been mentoring her," he told the room. "I knew she was onto something special." I'd kept my expression neutral, though Trevor had done nothing of the sort. In fact, he'd repeatedly questioned the validity of my approach until the preliminary results proved too compelling to ignore. Now, as I turned back to my computer, a notification appeared on my screen. A calendar invite from Trevor. "Discuss AMVI performance, private. Scheduled for tomorrow after the morning meeting." I felt a flicker of unease as I accepted the invitation. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to protect myself and my work before it was too late. The market correction hit harder and faster than anyone anticipated. Over 3 tumultuous days, global markets plunged, sending investors into a panic. Emergency meetings filled North Peak's conference rooms as analysts scrambled to assess the damage. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. The portfolios I'd restructured using my AMVI model held steady, outperforming market benchmarks by staggering margins. While competitors reported massive losses, North Peak's exposure was minimal. By Friday afternoon, it was clear. My model had just saved the firm tens of millions of dollars. I expected celebration, perhaps even an immediate promotion announcement. Instead, Trevor called me into his office and closed the door. "The executive team is thrilled with the performance of our risk management strategy," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I'll be briefing the board on Monday about how we navigated the correction." "That's great," I replied. "I've prepared a detailed report showing exactly how the AMVI model identified—" "No need," Trevor interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. I've already compiled everything the board needs to see. He slid a document across his desk. This is the press release going out tomorrow. I'd like you to review it for any technical inaccuracies. I scanned the document, my heart sinking with each paragraph. The release detailed North Peak's innovative risk assessment strategy that had safeguarded client assets during the market volatility. It credited the leadership of Trevor Phillips, head of risk management, for developing the approach. My name appeared nowhere in the document. There seems to be an oversight, I said carefully. The AMVI model was my development. As head of the department, all work produced under my supervision falls under my purview. Trevor responded smoothly. The model was refined and implemented with my guidance and authority. But I created the core algorithm and... Ivy. Trevor cut me off, his voice hardening. You're an employee of North Peak. Your work belongs to the firm, and as your supervisor, I determine how it's presented to the board and the public. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You'll be acknowledged within the department, of course. In fact, I've approved a modest bonus for your contribution. I bit the inside of my cheek to maintain composure. This wasn't just about credit, it was about my career trajectory. The director promotion I'd been working toward would certainly go to Trevor after this triumph. I understand, I said finally, placing the press release back on his desk. Excellent. Now, I need you to explain the stress test parameters you used. The board will have questions, and I want to be thoroughly prepared. For the next hour, I walked Trevor through the technical details of my model, watching as he took careful notes he would use to present my work as his own. As I spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. Trevor might believe he had won, but he had overlooked one crucial detail about me. I never left myself unprotected. The board meeting went exactly as I expected. Trevor emerged from the conference room with a triumphant smile, surrounded by congratulatory executives. As they passed my desk, CEO Jonathan Wells paused. The risk strategy performed brilliantly, he told me. Trevor mentioned you helped with some of the technical implementation. Good work. I forced a smile. Thank you, sir. Later that afternoon, the company-wide email arrived. Trevor had been promoted to Executive Director of Risk Management, effective immediately. The announcement cited his visionary approach to market volatility and development of proprietary risk assessment methodologies that positioned North Peak ahead of the market correction. As colleagues stopped by his office with congratulations, I remained at my desk, quietly adding the finishing touches to a document I'd been preparing for weeks. Long before the market correction, I'd sensed what might happen. Trevor had a history of claiming credit for subordinates' work, something I'd learned from a former colleague who'd left the firm bitterly after a similar experience. So I'd taken precautions. 3 months earlier, working with a patent attorney friend on evenings and weekends, I'd filed for trademark protection on the core mathematical formula that powered the AMVI model. The application had been carefully worded to cover the unique algorithm while excluding any proprietary North Peak data or specific implementations. According to my employment contract, general mathematical concepts I developed were not automatically company property, only their specific application to company systems. The trademark had been granted 2 weeks ago. After the markets closed, Trevor stopped by my desk, wearing the self-satisfied expression that had become his trademark. I wanted to personally thank you for your hard work, he said, loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. The bonus should hit your account next pay period. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're great with numbers, Ivy, just not the ones on your paycheck. I looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. Congratulations on your promotion, Trevor. You deserve everything that's coming to you. He seemed momentarily puzzled by my calm demeanor, but quickly recovered. I'm glad you understand how things work. I'll need the Anderson portfolio metrics updated with the new risk parameters by tomorrow. Of course, I replied. I'll leave everything ready for you. Trevor nodded and walked away, unaware that I'd just spoken literal truth. I would indeed leave everything ready, not just the Anderson portfolio, but detailed documentation of the AMVI development process, copies of my original work, and evidence of the dates when each component was created. I saved the email draft I'd been composing, setting it to send automatically at 9 a.m. Monday morning. The subject line read, "Resignation effective immediately." The attachment was a formal notification that any continued use of the AMVI methodology would require proper licensing from its registered trademark holder, me. What Trevor didn't know was that I had already scheduled a meeting with North Peak's largest competitor for Tuesday morning. They were very interested in licensing my algorithm. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I entered North Peak's gleaming office tower for what I knew would be the last time, nodding to the security guard as I swiped my badge. The familiar ping of the elevator and the quiet hum of the office felt suddenly foreign, like visiting a place I'd once lived long ago. I settled at my desk, powering up my computer for the final time. At precisely 9 a.m., my resignation email would automatically send to Trevor, Human Resources, and Jonathan Wells. I'd timed it perfectly. Trevor always held his newly established executive director's brief at 9 a.m. on Mondays, presenting to the senior leadership team. I spent the next hour methodically clearing personal items from my desk, careful not to draw attention. A photo of Vanessa and me at the Grand Canyon. A small jade plant I'd kept alive for 3 years. A coffee mug with a mathematical formula joke that only other analysts ever understood. Each item disappeared into my bag as I systematically erased my presence. At 8:55 a.m., I took one last look around, then walked calmly to the restroom where I waited, watching the seconds tick by on my watch. At precisely 9 a.m., I felt a subtle vibration, my phone confirming the automated email had been sent. I emerged to see Trevor's assistant hurrying toward his meeting room, a concerned expression on her face. Through the glass walls, I could see Trevor presenting confidently to the executive team. Then I watched as he glanced at his phone, frowned, and continued speaking. Moments later, several other executives checked their devices simultaneously. Jonathan Wells stood up abruptly, interrupting Trevor's presentation. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion and alarm spreading across Trevor's face as he read whatever message had just arrived on his phone. I didn't wait to see more. With practiced calm, I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and left North Peak Financial for the last time. Outside, I took a deep breath of the morning air, feeling strangely light. My phone immediately began buzzing with messages and calls, all of which I ignored as I walked to a nearby coffee shop. Only once I was settled at a corner table with a cappuccino did I finally check my messages. 6 missed calls from Trevor, 4 from Human Resources, 1 from Jonathan Wells, and dozens of text messages. Trevor, what the hell is this? Call me immediately. Trevor, you can't trademark company property. This is grounds for legal action. Trevor, you're making a massive mistake. I sipped my coffee calmly, watching the messages pile up. Then I opened my email to read the formal response from Human Resources. Ms. Carter, we have received your resignation letter and the accompanying notification regarding the AMVI methodology trademark. This matter has been referred to our legal department for immediate review. Please be reminded of your confidentiality obligations under your employment agreement. A representative will contact you shortly regarding exit procedures and the serious concerns raised by your communication. Right on schedule. I had anticipated exactly this response, which is why I'd engaged Patricia Winters, one of Houston's top intellectual property attorneys, weeks ago. I forwarded the email to her with a simple note. It's begun. Her response came within minutes. Proceed as planned. I'll handle any communications from their legal team. The next message that caught my attention was from Jonathan Wells himself. Ivy, I'm concerned by your sudden resignation and the claims regarding AMVI ownership. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss this directly before matters escalate further. Please call my assistant to arrange a meeting today. This was unexpected. In all my planning, I hadn't considered that the CEO might reach out personally. I hesitated, then decided that speaking with Wells could provide valuable insight into how the company planned to respond. I typed a careful reply. Mr. Wells, I'm available to meet at 2 p.m. today at Patricia Winter's office. She will be present as my legal counsel. I included the address, then pressed send. As I finished my coffee, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I heard a smooth, professional voice. Ms. Carter, this is Elaine Brenner, Chief Operating Officer at Veltri Dynamics. I understand you have something interesting to discuss with us tomorrow. Given recent developments, I'm wondering if you might be available today instead. The Veltri Dynamics offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown tower, offering panoramic views of Houston through floor-to-ceiling windows. Elaine Brenner met me in the reception area personally, a power move that wasn't lost on me. As Veltri's COO and the first woman to hold an executive position at the firm, she had a reputation for decisive action and strategic thinking. Thank you for accommodating the schedule change, she said, leading me to a conference room where 3 other executives waited. Recent events made our team eager to accelerate our conversation. The recent events she referred to were now spreading through the financial industry like wildfire. Somehow, and I had my suspicions about who was responsible, news of my resignation and trademark claim had leaked to financial news outlets. My phone had been buzzing with notifications from financial news apps all morning, with headlines ranging from Risk Model Ownership Dispute Rocks North Peak Financial to the more dramatic Mathematical Mutiny, Analyst Claims Ownership of Market-Beating Formula. I appreciate your interest, I replied, setting my portfolio on the polished conference table. Though I confess I'm curious how you learned about the situation so quickly. Elaine smiled. Houston's financial community is smaller than it appears. When someone develops a risk model that outperforms the market by 23% during a correction, people notice. When that same person then claims independent ownership of the methodology? She raised an eyebrow. Let's just say my phone started ringing before the markets opened. For the next hour, I presented the AMVI methodology to Veltri's executive team. I explained the core algorithm, demonstrated its performance during the correction, and outlined potential applications beyond the current implementation. Throughout my presentation, I was careful to use only the mathematical concepts I had developed, avoiding any proprietary North Peak data or specific implementations, exactly as my trademark application had been worded. When I finished, the room was silent for several moments. Impressive, said Gregory Turner, Veltri's chief risk officer. But I have to ask the obvious question. How can you be certain the trademark will hold up? North Peak will fight this aggressively. I had anticipated this concern. I opened my portfolio and distributed copies of a legal brief prepared by Patricia. My employment agreement with North Peak specifically covers work product created using company resources, data, or systems, I explained. However, the core mathematical formula that powers AMVI was developed independently, on my own time, using my personal equipment. I have documentation showing the evolution of the algorithm, time-stamped electronic records, and even witnesses who can attest to my work on the concept outside of North Peak. I paused, allowing them to scan the brief. Most importantly, I disclosed the general mathematical concept to the patent office before implementing it at North Peak, establishing clear precedent of independent development. Elaine exchanged glances with her colleagues. And you're offering us exclusive licensing rights? For the first year, yes, I confirmed, at which point we can negotiate continued exclusivity or explore other arrangements. What are your terms? I named a figure that made one of the executives cough. That's substantial, Elaine said carefully. So is a 23% performance advantage during a market correction, I countered. Consider that North Peak saved approximately $50 million using my model. What would that kind of protection be worth to Veltri's portfolio? The meeting concluded with handshakes and assurances of a formal offer within 24 hours. As Elaine walked me to the elevator, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why didn't you take this to North Peak first? Surely they would have compensated you appropriately once they understood the situation. I smiled. Let's just say North Peak and I have fundamentally different perspectives on appropriate compensation and recognition. As the elevator doors closed, my phone vibrated with a new message, Jonathan Wells confirming our 2 p.m. meeting. The real battle was about to begin. Patricia Winter's law office exuded quiet confidence, tasteful artwork, subdued lighting, and furniture that whispered expensive without shouting it. We sat in her private conference room, reviewing our strategy while waiting for Jonathan Wells to arrive. Remember, Patricia cautioned, this is a fact-finding mission for both sides. Don't volunteer information they don't explicitly request, and don't discuss your meeting with Veltri. I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. Despite my careful planning, a knot of anxiety had formed in my stomach. I'd never directly challenged someone as powerful as Jonathan Wells before. At precisely 2 p.m., Patricia's assistant ushered in the CEO of North Peak Financial. To my surprise, he came alone. No Trevor, no legal team. Just Jonathan Wells in his impeccable suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. "Ms. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. And Ms. Winters, I've heard excellent things about your work." After introductions and polite refusals of offered refreshments, Wells settled into his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'll be direct," he began. "Your resignation and trademark claim have created a significant situation for North Peak. Before our respective legal teams turn this into a protracted battle, I wanted to understand your perspective personally." Patricia nodded for me to respond. "I developed the core AMVI algorithm independently," I stated. "While I implemented it at North Peak using company data and systems, the underlying mathematical formula remains my intellectual property. When Trevor claimed full credit for my work and received a promotion based on that misrepresentation, I felt I had no choice but to protect my interests." Wells listened without interrupting, then opened his portfolio and removed several documents. "I've reviewed the press release and announcement that went out after the market correction," he said, sliding them across the table. "It appears Trevor presented the AMVI model as his own development, with no mention of your contribution." He paused. "This contradicts what he told me privately about the model's origins." This was unexpected. I glanced at Patricia, who maintained her professional poker face. "Can you elaborate?" she asked. Wells nodded. "In our initial discussions about the model, Trevor described it as a collaborative effort, with you handling the technical aspects under his strategic direction. Based on that understanding, I approved his promotion to executive director." "That's not accurate," I replied carefully. "Trevor actively questioned the validity of my approach until the preliminary results proved successful. He provided no meaningful input to the development of AMVI." Wells studied me, then reached for another document in his portfolio. "This morning, our technical team attempted to update the model parameters without your guidance. They encountered significant difficulties understanding the core algorithm." He looked up. "It seems Trevor cannot explain how the model actually works." A moment of silence filled the room as the implication settled. Trevor had claimed credit for a model he couldn't even explain. "Mr. Wells," Patricia interjected, "while this information is illuminating, it doesn't change the fundamental issue. My client has valid trademark protection for the core AMVI methodology. Any continued use by North Peak would require proper licensing." Wells nodded slowly. "I understand. But before we discuss licensing terms, I have a different proposition to consider." He turned to face me directly. "Ivy, I'd like to offer you the position of Executive Director of Innovation at North Peak, reporting directly to me. The role would include full credit for the AMVI model, a substantial compensation package, and autonomy to build your own team." The room suddenly felt very still. This was nowhere in my planned scenarios. "And Trevor?" I asked. "Mr. Phillips is no longer with North Peak as of this morning," Wells replied. "His misrepresentation of your work was grounds for immediate termination." I felt a rush of vindication, quickly followed by uncertainty. I had been so focused on my exit strategy that I hadn't considered the possibility of a better position at North Peak. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but there's something you should know. I've already had preliminary discussions with Veltri Dynamics about licensing AMVI." The next morning, financial news outlets exploded with headlines. North Peak announces, new executive director of innovation. Risk model creator promoted after ownership dispute. Trevor Phillips, out at North Peak amid intellectual property controversy. After intense negotiations that lasted well into the evening, I had accepted Jonathan Wells' offer with several key conditions. First, North Peak would publicly acknowledge me as the sole creator of the AMVI methodology. Second, I would retain personal trademark ownership while granting North Peak exclusive implementation rights. And finally, I would have complete autonomy over a newly formed innovation division with a substantial budget and staffing authority. It was far more than I had initially hoped for when I'd planned my departure. As I rode the elevator to my new executive suite on North Peak's top floor, I could hardly believe how dramatically the situation had reversed. My new office, Trevor's former space, had already been cleared of his belongings. The spectacular view of downtown Houston spread before me as I set down my bag and took a seat behind the expansive desk. A knock at the door interrupted my moment of reflection. "Your first executive meeting starts in 15 minutes, said Melissa, the assistant who had been assigned to me. "And Mr. Wells asked me to deliver this personally." She handed me an envelope and withdrew quietly. Inside, I found a handwritten note from the CEO. "Ivy, welcome to the executive team. Your integrity and brilliant work deserve this recognition. I apologize for not recognizing the situation sooner, but I'm grateful we've retained your talents at North Peak. Looking forward to your leadership. Jonathan." Beneath the note was a press release draft for my approval. The headline read, "North Peak Financial promotes Ivy Carter, creator of market-beating AMVI methodology, to Executive Director of Innovation." As I prepared for my first executive meeting, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the promotion. Always knew you were destined for great things. Coffee sometime? Trevor." I smiled, deleted the message without responding, and headed to the conference room where the executive team awaited my arrival. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in the North Peak Conference Center, addressing an audience of industry analysts and financial journalists. Behind me, a large screen displayed performance metrics of the expanded AMVI system I had developed with my new team. "The financial sector has traditionally relied on reactive risk management," I explained, advancing to the next slide. "The AMVI 2.0 framework represents a paradigm shift toward predictive analytics, identifying vulnerability patterns weeks before traditional indicators show cause for concern." The presentation continued with demonstrations of how our enhanced system had navigated subsequent market fluctuations with remarkable precision. When I concluded, the room erupted in applause, followed by a barrage of questions that reflected genuine interest in the methodology I'd created. Afterward, as attendees networked over refreshments, Jonathan Wells approached with a woman I recognized immediately, Elaine Brenner from Veltri Dynamics. "Excellent presentation, Ivy," Wells said. "I believe you know Elaine." I shook her hand, noting the irony of the situation. "We've met." "Ms. Carter," Elaine said with a professional smile. "Impressive work. Though I must admit, I was disappointed when our licensing discussions fell through." "Sometimes things work out differently than expected," I replied diplomatically. Wells looked between us with interest. "Elaine and I have been discussing a potential strategic partnership between North Peak and Veltri. Given your history, I thought you might have some insights to contribute." As the conversation continued, I reflected on how completely the tables had turned. 6 months ago, I had been preparing to help Veltri compete against North Peak. Now, I was discussing how the firms might collaborate, with my innovation division at the center of the potential partnership. Later that evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a notification on my phone. A financial news alert reported that Trevor Phillips had been hired as a junior risk analyst at a small regional firm, a significant step down from his executive role at North Peak. I couldn't help but smile as I headed home, savoring the perfect symmetry of justice served. My journey from overlooked analyst to executive had taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. In the world of finance, the most powerful asset isn't money or connections. It's owning your intellectual capital and knowing exactly when to leverage it.